Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Brenda Randolph, one of the co-directors at the Center for African Studies at Howard University. Just a little bit about our center. Our center was created in 2014 with a grant from the U.S. Department of Education, Title VI. And we are one of 10 national resource centers on Africa. We are also a part of a larger group of Title VI centers tasked with engaging educators in the study of the world. Georgetown's Center for Contemporary Arab Studies is one of these centers. And since 2015, we have collaborated every spring to introduce educators to outstanding books on our representative world areas. Also with me today from Howard University is Dr. Vanessa Oyugi, who is the co-outreach director, and also Dr. Helen Bond from the School of Education, who today will be handling our Q&A. And of course, Susan Douglas is with us from Georgetown University and our speakers. So I think now I'm going to turn it over to you, Susan. Is that correct?
That is fine. I want to welcome everybody on behalf of the Georgetown University Center for Contemporary Arab Studies, whose outreach program has been in force since 1983, amazingly enough, and which is also a national resource center on the Middle East and North Africa, funded by a Department of Education grant, which is funding this activity and the speakers and everything of that nature. And so we're very glad to be having our 7th annual. It always attracts teachers, librarians, and many others. Very exciting to do this collaboration again. So I would like to turn it over then, I guess, to Helen Bond, who is also our institutional collaborator with the School of Education at Howard University. So we're very happy to have pre-service and in-service teachers and others here today.
Thank you, Susan, for that. I'd like to welcome all our listening and viewing audience. My name is Helen Bond. I'm a liaison to the Center for African Studies. What a wonderful partnership, wonderful center. Do visit us on campus when you're able. I'd like to say a welcome from the Department of Curriculum and Instruction in the School of Education at Howard. I have my students with me today. I'm watching them log on. Welcome, students. Thank you for joining us. And I'd like to say you are really in for a treat today. Much work, a lot of funds. Thank you to our grantors for sponsoring us. And I will pass this on to Vanessa, Dr. Oyugi. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. As Brenda introduced, I'm Vanessa Oyugi, the co-outreach director at Howard University. Welcome, everybody. It'll be a lovely afternoon. I would like to jump right in and introduce our first guest, our first presenter, Omar Mohamed, who is one of the 2021 winners of the Children's Africana Award. And he is with us today all the way from India. Omar Mohamed spent his childhood at the Dadaab camp after he was separated from his mother during the war in Somalia. He devoted everything to taking care of his younger brother, Hassan, and to pursuing his education. He now lives in Lancaster, Pennsylvania with his wife and 5 children and works at a center to help resettle other refugees. He is the founder of Refugee Strong, a nonprofit organization that empowers students living in refugee camps. Let us all welcome Omar Mohamed.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to join you all. Special thanks to Howard University and all those who have organized this event. So my name is Omar Muhammad. I am the co-author of When Stars Are Scattered. So I didn't did any research or anything, but I only told my story, shared my story. It is something that I've lived through. And this is my personal story. The guy with the red shirt, has me. The other person is my brother, Hassan. And there's several reasons I choose to share my story. One of the major reasons, the major one is, I wanted to highlight, or maybe just to point to the rest of the world, why those refugees are refugees. Is it by choice or is it by circumstances? After you read this book, maybe you can come with a conclusion that you can say, okay, after reading your story, I think you choose to be a refugee, or maybe I think you guys not choose to be a refugee. So, and then being a refugee is not a choice. If I tell you a little thing about myself, I was born in Somalia. When I was about 4 years old, there was a war in my home country, Somalia, in early 1990s. There was a civil war in Somalia. Then we have to flee for our safety to the neighboring countries. Some Somalis fled to Ethiopia, some fled to Kenya, someone to Djibouti, someone to Sudan, or someone to displaced within the country, within Somalia. So for me, we were very lucky that we were able to go to the neighboring country called Kenya, where we lived as a refugee for over 17 years. And then we always talk about those refugees seeking refuge, but we also forget those who lost their life when they were seeking refuge. We will never able to hear their stories, or we will never ever to hear from them because we lost them. Maybe over 50 or 40% of those refugees fleeing die on their way. And if I give you one example, even we have to emphasize, how does fleeing looks like? For me, in my case, fleeing looks like you have to flee and you go where there's no gunshots, where there's no gunfire, where there's no, everybody's running towards to. And then we just followed people. You know, at that time I was only 4. My brother was only 2 years old. We fled with our neighbors. So it took us about 3 months to come to the neighboring country, Kenya. It took 3 months. So how does the fleeing happen? Is you just walk from tree to tree, then you just take a rest under a tree. There's a lot of people died of dehydration, no food. A lot of people died for such things. Sometimes someone will carry you on their back. Sometimes someone will carry you on top of they have camel or cow or donkey, cat, whatever they have, means of transporting the vulnerable, like children and seniors, adults, that may not be able to walk. So that's why it took us. By the time we came, here's the difficult time. By the time we came to the border, where the UN was waiting, whoever makes it to those refugee camps, then we were what's called skeletons, because dehydrated. We were not able to talk. We were not able to say even our names. That is why at some point you will see a lot of refugees, specifically that part of the world, their death path is January 1st. Why is it? How can a whole generation be born January 1st? Is it? So what happened is they will just look at you and then give you an estimate. Maybe this child can be 4 years, 5 years, and then they will just put January 1st, 1991, January 1st, 1991, January 1st. So that's why a lot of refugees from that part of the world, their birth date is usually 90% January 1st. And some of them even may give a wrong name because they were not able to provide anything at that time and they were needed to be registered. So how is life in a refugee camp? How does a life looks like in a refugee camp? And if I give you 1 or 2 things about life in a refugee camp is the United Nations, agencies like UNHCR, United Nations Higher Commission for Refugees, maybe from my understanding, they were planning to host 70, 80,000 refugees or maybe 100,000 refugees. But in that camp specifically, that refugee camp, over 300,000 refugees showed up. So what does that cost? That cost the scarcity of everything. Of anything that was available was not enough. Anything that was available was not enough because they were planning for 100,000 refugees, but over 300,000 refugees showed up. I was very young, but when I go back now and ask those adults at that time, they told me a lot of people died when they come to the camp for lack of water, for poor sanitation, for poor lack of food. They died in the camp after even they make out of the war zone, because this was kind of new weather, new food. Everything was kind of different too, because a lot of people may assume if you are in Africa, if you are in Nigeria, it's the same as you are in Kenya. Maybe if you are in Kenya, it's not even the same as the neighboring country. Africa is a continent, not a country. That's why we are sometimes even you see different cultures, different food. What we eat in Somalia, we may not have it in some part of Kenya too. So that was a very, very difficult, challenging time. And then what happened was me and my younger brother, when we came to the camp with no parental support, because when the war happened, mom in the market, father at the farm, mom and ourselves get separated. Father became the victim of that war. And then what happened? Fleeing with our neighbors, coming to the camp by ourselves. And then we were helped by a mom called Fatuma, who lost all her family in the war. She was the sole survivor. If you read the book, you may get to know her a little bit. So she was the sole survivor. And with the help of UN, she was able to adapt us and also raise us as her own, kids of her own, although we didn't live in the same house. But when you hear about adoption, you may think doing paperwork and all that stuff. No, it's just a verbal agreement between me, who was 4 years old, 5 years old, and Fatuma with UN. Fatuma opening her house and me just walking in. Nothing, no paperwork. That's why she was not able to come with us in the resettlement process, because she didn't have any document to prove that she was our foster mom. No matter how much we explained, you know, in America, you have to show a paper or nothing happened. So in the camp, as I said, there was scarcity of everything and anything that was available. And specifically in the refugees, there was food distribution once a month, sometimes, or once every other 2 weeks, 15 days, for example. The food that is being distributed was never enough, because as I said earlier, what was planned and the number of refugees that showed up was not was like very uncomparable. So in the camp, those 15 days that we take the food, it is you wait. For example, after 15 days, some people will run out of food the first week, or maybe the first week and a half. You will see, like, we call it down weeks before the food distribution. If you want to go fetch water or maybe get water, the water only runs twice a day, early in the morning and in the evening. So there's no water running water 24/7. Hospitals, don't even mention them. You know, they are overcrowded. Even some people, even sick, you may get sicker by just going to the hospital. For example, they have one big hole. And you know, like then someone who has fever or headache, someone who has another diarrhea, someone who have malaria, someone who has, they all share. Someone, 3 beds, 3 patients next to each other may have totally different disease, and they're exposed to each other. They're treating you from one, but you're also exposed to another one. That's how vulnerable their medical system is. And it still is too, because I was there last year. It is very, you get sick by just going to the hospital. That's how miserable it is. And also during COVID, I was there last year because COVID was there, COVID too. A lot of refugees died for COVID, and the rest of the world doesn't know. And we don't hear from their stories. Because imagine the countries like the US faced such death rate from COVID. And you can imagine people in that refugee camp with COVID, how death rate can be, how terrible it can be. A lot of people died, people that I know, that people I grew, my neighbors that I grew up with died during COVID-19. Those last 2 years, they died. And because not even having water to wash your hands daily whenever you touch anything, and even living like open land where everybody's open, there's no closed doors because everyone lives on their tent. They were not able to do that. So life was actually, you wake up every morning, you clean your tent, you fetch water, those kids go to school. And I will tell you a little bit how schools looks like in the camp, and then do nothing. Those refugees in the refugee camps call it open prison. The reason they call it open prison is those refugees are not allowed to live outside that refugee camp. And it is true. You can research and find out. Those refugees are not allowed to travel within even the country they are in. For example, Kenya, they are not allowed to travel within Kenya. Only you are allowed under 2 conditions. One, you are doing interviews, resettlement processes, and you get a paper, something called travel document from UN, then you can travel. You you have a serious medical case that was considered by UN to be treated outside the camp. For example, like Nairobi, Garissa, those closer towns within Kenya, which is very few, then maybe you'd be allowed to travel. And those are only even 1% of those travel documents. Other than that, you cannot travel within Kenya freely. You can't go to Nairobi, Garissa, or even Dadaab itself too, because there's checkpoints outside the refugee camps that if the police catch you, you'll be sent back. Sometimes you may prison too. And it's very fortunate. Imagine doing the same thing for over 30 years, because those refugees in that camp, specifically in the Dadaab refugee camps, have been there since 1991, 1992. They were kids. They are kids who were born in that refugee camp. They get married in that refugee camp, and they have their own kids now in that refugee camp. And that is the only place that they know. The only place that they know is Dadaab refugee camp, or even that refugee camp. That is their nationality now. Refugee is their nationality. And I will tell you one thing. During previous President Trump, when he said no countries, 11 countries during the travel ban, those 11 countries that were not allowed to travel, Somalis were one of them. And those refugees in that refugee camp were really hit by that travel ban. And then this was one question I was constantly asking my congressman specifically. I told him, I was born in Somalia. The Somali government has zero information about me, zero information. I left when I was 4 years old. And those who were born also in Somalia, in the refugee camp, the Somali government has zero information about it. They even don't know their existence. But who has all that information? The United Nations. They shared with who? The USCIS, with the US government. So it was really tough when the UN has that information and the US has that information, but they were not still considered. Those also were not still considered valid. They were not able to come at that time until later. So those refugees are very unfortunate. How does the schools in the refugee camp looks like? Life has improved, I will admit, compared to when I was there. And what makes the change is those refugees that were resettled overseas, like US, Canada, Europe, and around the world, we give back. We support those refugees who are still in the refugee camp. We give something called monthly donations to our former neighbors, to our friends that we grew up with. That actually made some small changes. That make some small, has improved some lives of those refugees. And the schools at that time, when I was in Dadaab, there was a lot of what you guys called elementary and middle school, but we call it primary schools. Anything below 8th grade was available to all the children. But how was the class look like? The classes were overpopulated, maybe 100 above. Students will sit one small classroom, sit on the floor. Notebooks were not available. You may share one notebook with 5 subjects, or maybe 6 subjects, and one pencil you may have until you run out of it. Pen, even don't mention. Shoes, we never wear them when we were in those refugee camps. You wear one long shirt that goes up to your knee, and you're all good to go. Then what happens after 8th grade is there was only one high school in Ifo refugee camp, and they only had a space for 150 students at that time. In my time then, we were about over 860 something students set for the exam, 8th grade. They only have a space for 150 students. The rest can't continue their education. I'm not talking about getting admission to Howard or Georgetown or any other college in Kenya, but only continuing their high school education from middle school to high school. A lot of kids have to be left on the streets because they didn't get the opportunity to go to high school. I was very fortunate that I was one of good students that get up to a good grade to go to high school. The way they grade was they had a space for 150 students. Then if you are number 150, If you are like 150, then you move on. Anyone below you, they have no space for them. That is what was happening at that time with for education. And then kids were very, they didn't enjoy, specifically even including myself. Being a child is a privilege, and those children in the refugee camps did not enjoy their childhood. They didn't enjoy, they didn't get. And now being a father, being an adult, I feel the pain those parents went through, because maybe I was young, although I was feeling a lot of stress, a lot of challenges, a lot of difficulties, but I still feel the pain those mothers feel, because they're holding their baby crying for milk or even food, and they don't have nothing to feed. I can imagine the pain they go through daily. Some of them bury their own kids for hunger or for starvation. It's very heartbreaking. But I was very lucky that I was one of the few refugees that were resettled. And we always forget, refugees are the most vetted communities, vetted people around the world. And because we are only 1% are considered for the resettlement process. 1% of the 1% that are considered make it to the end of those interviews, of those screenings, because you'll be screened, pre-screened, interviewed, re-interviewed, and then taken to medical. Then you'll be considered. And who has the final decision for you coming to America? The USCIS. If you read my book, it will tell you at the end where you receive an envelope that says you pass or your case was denied. And then when you come this part of the world, when you come to the US, and you get this different reaction, where people don't know what you went through, what process you did, and you come this part of the world, they tell you, go back to where you are from. You don't belong here. It's very sad. And one thing we usually we face here when we come to America is race, because in the refugee camp, everybody's black. We never talk about race. I never ever hear about this black. I never hear about that. We never had that conversation, and we never hear about it because it wasn't part of our problem. Then that became a really surprising. It really surprised us when we came to this part of the world, and it was something that we were not trained or told about during the orientations. They told us everything about America, but they told us they never told us how some people are racist, or even the role race plays when it comes to opportunities or even equality or justice. No one told us no one told us anything about it. So it was really tough. But I always have one simple answer whenever I'm told, or me and my clients that I usually help, when we are told go back to where you are from, the simple answer I usually give is, everyone came to this country one time. We just happened to be the last one to arrive. Someone let you in, so do not close the door behind you, because if someone else could have closed their doors, you wouldn't be here, but you won't be here too. Refugees that are coming to this country legally are really vetted. They're the most vetted. They are the most interviewed, and they're the most screened. And that process usually takes about 7 years, more than 7 years sometimes. But at least it takes, the first day you are considered, and the day you leave, you are scheduled for flight. It can be about 5 years, 7 years, or above sometimes. I know some people who did the interview in 2009. They did their interview. Their case was interviewed by USCIS. They were approved in 2009. I'm not saying 2019, 2009. Up to now, they're in the Deb refugee camp. They didn't come yet. How many years? Over 14 years, or maybe 13 or 12 years. That's how long it takes the resettlement process to come to America. So also in the refugee camp, I talked about food, scarcity of food, scarcity of water, scarcity of housing, scarcity of clothes, scarcity of everything and anything that was available. And someone earlier yesterday brought my attention to about solar ovens that uses sun power. It was actually, I remember as a child sewing that, I saw that. I even eat food that was cooked, solar ovens that only use power, because the dab is very hot, it's very dust, and it is very dry. There's not a lot of trees. Those trees are only trees that were planted by those refugees after they came. Then if you say, I want to go and look for firewood, it's going to take you whole day. Before, in 1994, 95, it used to be closer, but now all those refugees all going for firewood, that caused also deforestation, big climate change. So the firewoods actually are not available. Even if they are available, they are very, very, very far for anyone to get, because now men with donkey carts go and look for firewood, and sometimes they are gone for a whole month, something to cook for food. They are even running out of it. So there were people who introduced something called solar ovens that uses only sun power. And maybe it is something that will really benefit to those refugees in the Dadaab refugee camp. So, and also before I conclude and give time for Q&A, I also wanted to share why I choose to share my story and why we make it graphic novel. We wanted to see the children around the world. If I talk about schools, houses, food, they may assume the similar houses that they live, the similar schools that they go, the similar food that they eat. So we just wanted to show some pictures of how the schools look like, how the houses looks like, how the food looks like, how the people look like, and that's why we choose to make it graphic novel. And it's also Vicky's decision also that she has to convince me. We also want to show children in different parts of the world who live different life than theirs, different life than theirs. Because, you don't know what you don't have until you don't have them. You don't know and if I come back to highlight one or two things about the struggle that I faced when I came to America. My struggle didn't end in the refugee camps. I graduated high school. Then I get the opportunity to be resettled here in the US. Life was very hard the first 2 years. The first 2 years was very hard. And the worst time of my time in the US was my first year in college. It was very hard. I went to University of Arizona in Tucson, Arizona. I knew nobody. I have to hustle, get all the paperwork, the application, do the test, all this stuff. It's not with actually some friends helped me, but with no major help. Nothing actually. I wish now I had people who had experience, who know how to help those newly arrived refugees get access to education, give them some guidance of different programs that were available. Nothing. I have to all figure it out for myself. And it was really tough, really tough. I spent most of my time in the library because, this is the first time I'm going to type something. I'm going to touch a computer, actually. I've never touched a computer. And this professor is expecting me to type a paper of eight-page essay for a week. And that's going to take me a lot of time for me when I'm going to go word by word. When English is your fifth language, even gets worse. So it was really tough for me. I didn't have a lot of friends. I remember even sometimes, I remember the first class, the first course that I took was statistics. And it was a big hall, 500 students. I walked into the hall and I was surprised. I was really shocked. I was only in the US for maybe about a year. I looked around, everybody sitting with their snacks, students taking notes with iPads, some of them with laptops. I knew I had my notebook and a pen and pencil. I was committed to learn and never give up because I know what it means to struggle. This was nothing to me. So it was really tough, really tough, really, really tough. I go class to class. Then after my class ends, I go straight to the library. And then I leave, I will stay in college all day and I leave sometimes 11 or even midnight. I have to finish everything at the school, at the campus before even I go home. That is how tough and challenging it was. It's really tough. Even sometimes when I remember, I can't imagine. I was this close to give up many times, many times. I was very close to give up, but I'm not used to giving up. That's why I worked hard. And one thing I usually struggle with, I was new student, new to the country, new to the college, new to everything, but still my professor adds me to do a group study where you do a group presentation with 5 or 4 other students. Then they invite me, and then they just treat me as any other American child who knows everything. And then one thing I really used to have tough times is, most of their time they may spend in one occasion, I remember, and it was the first time they spend most of their time talking about what's going on, the football, basketball, blah, blah, and then the last 30 minutes, let's do this. Then they type quick, blah, blah, what is this, what is that? And I'm just sitting there wondering. And then I have to tell them, guys, I don't know if I'm getting anything from this group or not. That is why if you are a student, be always careful about and be careful with your group mate. And also be cautious about maybe people are not the same understanding as each other. Life was really hard. That is why I choose, I choose to always help those who need my help. Also, always help those refugees who are coming to this country. I've been a resettlement case manager for over now 7 years. Now I am the director of Refugee Strong, which is a non-profit organization. Our mission is empowering refugees through education. And you may wonder why I choose education. It's very simple. Those refugees in the refugee camps have 3 options. 1, to go back to your home country if it is safe. 2, to stay in that refugee camp for the rest of their life. 3, to get a resettlement opportunity to go to another country like US, Canada. And there's only one thing that goes with them wherever they go, and that is their education. If they get an education, a better education in that refugee camp, wherever they go, their education is going to help them. And that is why I am committed, and our organization, Refugee Strong, which is 501c3, we are committed to providing resources and support to those refugees in the refugee camps before they come even to America. And I'm here in the US helping those refugees that are resettled here in the US. So I want to thank you. I know I forget a lot. So being a refugee, if you want to take 2 or 3 things from my story or from my book, it will be no one wants to be a refugee. I didn't choose to be a refugee. And that is the last thing any human being wants to be a refugee. My parents were what you guys call a middle-class family. They were able to provide anything and everything that we needed. We didn't need to come to America and be treated like a second-class citizen, or even be called refugees or immigrants or whatsoever we may be called. We didn't want that. And that is not something that my parents wanted for me or even imagined for us. So thank you. That is one thing that I want you to take from my story. And I want to thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much. So now it is time for me to ask me questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you going to show the, excuse me, are we going to, Mohammed, are you going to share the slides?
If you have the time, yes.
Mohammed, can you maybe share something about each slide and then tell me when to go to the next one?
Yep, that is the cover of the book. When stars are scattered, can move on to the next. Yeah, you see now how in the camp looks like someone, a child pushing a wheelbarrow. Another one, that's Hassan actually feeding the donkey cart. That is how people get the firewoods. Then a lot of us also keep goats as a means of resource too, because you buy one goat and then it produces, then you sell it, then you make money. That will help you to buy some of the foods that were not provided. Thank you. You can go on. That is how you line up when you want to fetch water, at fetch water or food. Thank you. That is during food distribution. Me and Hassan, the police are always there, making sure nobody is breaking the law. People line up for food. Once you get your share, you walk, there's entrance and exit. So some of the stuff that we get is maize, cooking oil, and salt. And this is not enough. Imagine it's me carrying that food, and they want that food to last for maybe a whole month or sometimes 15 days. And the food that is provided is only maize, cooking oil, and salt. Then where are we going to get sugar or even rice or even beans or even other things that you need? You can't only eat every day maize, maize, maize. Yes, next. So this is also like we try to have fun, although it is hard, but still we try means of blame. So thank you. This is at school, I guess. You can see how the classes are overcrowded, how one desk, it may share like five or four students in one desk. Some even used to sit on the, if you see like one of the pictures, there's students sitting in front of the chair. Those are like out of desks. And that's also one thing we are really committed with my organization is providing more desks. Also, girls' education is a big problem in that refugee camp because of cultural background. And we're really trying to change that with my organizations. We provided sanitary pads to all high school girls last year and this year. We built girls for their own toilets or latrines, because before it was abandoned. They were sharing the same toilets or bathrooms with boys. And you can imagine how awkward it is when when there's a boy waiting at the door wants to use the same bathroom that you use. So we really wanted to make some minor changes in the beginning. So, but in the future, we will be enrolling more girls in school. Thank you. That is also, this is me going to school, and Jerry, I think my friend Jerry, he still lives in the camp. So, and one thing that I never understand, and up to now I don't understand, is why a poor refugee in a refugee camps was required to wear a school uniform when they cannot afford even to get their own clothes. It was something that I never understood. A lot of kids may even drop out from school because of school uniform. How do you want them to wear a school uniform where they can't even get something to wear? And it was very fortunate. We were required to wear a white shirt and blue pants every day. And you wash at night and then you put on in the morning. Thank you. So also this is how the compound looks like. So this is waiting area, the UN compound before, if you are scheduled for interview or even for other reasons. This is how the UN compound looks like. It's always overcrowded, a lot of people. Thank you. During the interview, some of the interviews, you'll always be interviewed. And that person is one of Susana Martinez, a volunteer that really helped us and walked us through this process. And the interview is very tough because you are sharing what you went through to a stranger that you don't know, and then you have to reshare again and again to this stranger that you don't know if he or she is going to approve or decline your case. Thank you. This is then our flight to the US, the first time we left. And then, a lot of people may think this is an excitement. We are excited because we are leaving such a difficult life behind, such a bad place to live or to grow up, but we are also leaving people that we knew, people that we grew up with, anything and everything that we knew also behind. I think a lot of us are really not prepared for such a transition. And when you come to America, those resettlement organizations may not have enough resources to support those children, those refugees when they come to America. And that's why a lot of them actually fail in life after even they come to America, because of the support or even the system that's been put in place for them here. Thank you. And this is how the DAB looks like. It's very huge, and it has Dagahle on top, E4, E42. The DAB town is a small town in the middle. That's the green. So that is how the camps looks like. Thank you. Welcome to the refugee camps. This sign is always there, and you can imagine how many countries support. I don't know if this is by name or if this is real. We can continue. That is my brother Hassan and myself. This is one of the classrooms that we built. Those pictures that you see are orphanage kids that never went to school. So they started school last year, and I was able to find them from villages, take them to school, register them, and now they are able to read and write for the first time. Thank you. That is me walking them to school for the first time. The orphanage kids that are going to school for the first time. We provide for them school uniform. And one thing we are totally different from other organizations is we go behind the scene. We identify the most vulnerable among the vulnerables, and then we will try to help them. Go ahead. Some of the kids in the camp. Still some of the kids. We were actually water, how water runs daily. This is how the water tub looks like. And I was showing a video about how there's no water running, but we will show another time. We can move on. You can actually skip. It's going to take long. Some houses, tents. Yep, next. This is how the latrines look like, the toilets that they use. This is where you line up for ration. So these people are in line for this when you come in before the food distribution. These are some of my volunteers actually. So last year, we were able to provide this metal, which is used as a temporary library so they can keep their books. But now we built a library actually. It's just finished now, the library. This is what we delivered. Each school last year, we were able to give this metal cupboard where we put a lot of books. They can keep, they can use as a temporary library where students can borrow books. And that is me with some school representatives. We can go next. These are also some of the books that we delivered last year to those refugee camps. And this is one of the schools that were the beneficiaries. Those are different types of revision books: biology, chemistry, math, English, science, all different subjects. We were not able to provide money, so these books will be put into that keyboard, a metal cupboard. Then they will be able to share each other. Thank you. We were able to have some fun. There was a donor that said she can host a soccer tournament. Actually, she was a small young girl from California. Her name is Ria. So she was able to donate some money to raise funds for only soccer tournament, so those kids can have fun. And we named after herself. It's called a Ria Soccer Tournament for only under 12 years kids. And we were able to provide jerseys, soccer balls, all that stuff. Thank you. This is them after they won, after this team won the tournament. So there was one selfie of a nice one. Also, this year we are providing transportation to students with disabilities. Those are visually blind or deaf or physically disabled students. They discontinued going to school because of their disability. So we didn't want it. I didn't want that. Because of my brother's disability and him not getting an education, I don't want any other child to go the same, to go what my brother wants. My brother, nothing was available to him, nothing of any type of education because of his disability. Even day program, nothing was available to him. So I said to myself, what can you do for those students with special needs? So those now are getting transportation. Our organization, Refugee Strong, with your support, is providing car that takes them from school home every day to those students with they are like visually blind or physical disabilities or even deaf or even some other disabilities that they may have. Thank you. Yep, that is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Omar, for that. I have a few comments before we start our questions, but I want to say to the audience, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We do have one question standing, and then there are no other questions in the chat. Perhaps you can raise your hand. But Omar, I have to say, and I don't know if I've even told my students that for 2 years during the intercession period at Howard University, I went and lived in a UN camp and near 5 major in the Somali region of Ethiopia. And I helped train teachers from 5 of the largest refugee camps in that area. One was Halloween, but there are some others. A few of them actually have closed. And so I know the ingenuity, the strength, the intelligence, the wherewithal that those teachers who were refugees themselves, you know, and they brought 25 from each camp. And for 2 years, I had a chance. Of course, I had lived a while in Ethiopia. I was familiar with the region, but I had the chance to stay. It was about a mile from the border of Somalia. So I want to say that I was very familiar. I want to congratulate you on your work, and I want to get directly to the questions. We have a standing question in the chat where, let me go to make sure that I get it. But does the US really vet all refugees in the same way? For example, is there more vetting of African refugees as opposed to whites or those from Muslim countries? Thank you.
Yes, I think it is self-explanatory, and specifically now about not even a refugee. Me, I'm now in India for some personal reasons. Whenever I travel outside the US, when I go back, I know I'll spend maybe an hour or 2 hours to be vetted again. Even I'm a US citizen, just for being, my last name is Muhammad. So I don't know, you know, they can vet me as many times as they want, but I'll never change my last name. So it is something that is systematic. How come I travel every year outside to Kenya, to those refugee camps, and I go back to the US? How come the US government always cannot clarify me? Even me, I traveled for the last 5 years. Every time I go back to the US and they scan my passport, it gives cross. Then I have to be sent to the US customs, and then they interrogate me. They ask me questions, where I was, what I was doing. Then I have to tell them everything, and then they let me go. Now we Muslim communities, or even Africans, or whatever we are called, if now I told my friend, say, come and pick me up from the airport, and I told him what time, he asked me what time I'm coming, I tell him my flight is coming 3 p.m. I know they will come at 6 p.m. It's just systematic. They will never come at 3 p.m. or even 4 p.m. They know I'm going to be pulled aside and to be, so those refugees, yes, even for me, I wanted to go to Ukraine to help those Ukrainian refugee children, to share with them my books. But I know the Ukrainians themselves will do racist things to me. It's a reality, it's a fact. It's something that we don't have to feel shy away from. Even them, refugees themselves, who are struggling. Some videos that I watched, that is really disturbing. You see them pushing their fellow refugees with color of color, pushing them from the trains, telling them, you are not Ukrainians. Well, it doesn't matter who they are. Everyone is fleeing for their safety. Safety comes first. Let us save ourselves. Then we can talk and argue about our race. This is white, this is brown, this is black. We can talk about it later, but let us save ourselves first from the harm. Even some of those Ukrainians, not all of them, some of those who are pushing those students or those refugees with color, it was very sad. It really touched me personally, because I really wanted to go. And then I was a little hesitant how they are going to welcome me. Before even I worry about countries like Poland, who are really anti-refugees or anti-Muslim and anti-everything. So, but I know what someone said from the Poland government, who said all refugees are welcome except Muslims. I don't know I don't know how such hatreds or what we can do about it. Yes, those refugees with Muslim backgrounds or even with black skin color who are non-whites are really treated. And it is, we always have plans, but God always has a better plan for each and every one of us. Maybe this is eye-opening for everybody. We hear about Afghanistan refugees, how the rest of the world treated. We hear about Palestinian crisis. We know how the rest of the world treated. We hear about the Libyan, the Somalis. We know how the rest of the world treated. Now we are seeing Ukrainians, and everyone sees how the rest of the world treated. For me personally, I want each and every refugee to be treated humane, regardless of their race, regardless of their nationality, regardless of their religion, regardless of their nationality. because we're all human beings and we need to be treated with dignity and respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. We have another question in the chat. Thank you for that. What's the youngest age or grade would you recommend to read and learn from your amazing book?
I heard a lot of different grades, but this is a middle school graphic, maybe 8 or 5. I've seen kids as young as 5 or 6 that read my book, but it's more on middle school grade novel. But I've also seen a lot of adults that said, "Oh, after my daughter or my son read, we also read the book and we loved it." So it was good for almost all the ages, but I won't recommend for younger kids because it's a lot of emotional. And you know, we left a lot of stuff. And I will tell you one thing that we left. I have 3 sisters and they were never mentioned in the book, but stay tuned for future books. We will get to mention them. Thank you.
Wonderful. We're going to look forward to that, hearing about your 3 sisters. Omar, are they in the States with you, or where are your sisters?
No. Stay
Okay.
tuned for the next book.
Okay, stay tuned. Okay, very good.
But they're not here in the US. They're not here in the US. We were just separated the same as we were separated from my mom.
Okay. Okay, we are going to stay tuned for that. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Would anyone like to unmute and ask your question? If you would kindly just raise your hand, put your hand up on the screen and you can unmute. Okay, we have Louise. Louise's hand is up. Louise Meyer. Louise, you're muted.
Okay,
Louise, you're
I'm muted. Oh, I'm unmuted now. Okay. Hello, Omar and everyone. I know a lot of people listening in. I'm the one that wrote you about the solar ovens in the DOB. Yes, I'm so thankful that you mentioned the use and the need, and that you actually saw them. And when you were still there, you had some food cooked. My organization, based in Sacramento, California, was the one that introduced the solar ovens in the DOB, probably before you were born, about 25 years ago, when the refugee camp was not yet 300,000, maybe it was a 100,000 at the time. In any case, the action is still happening because the cost of providing wood to that number of refugees is a huge burden on the World Food Program and the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. They have an obligation to provide drinking water and food, basic food and fuel. The fuel will never be enough because the trees are gone, but the sun is abundant. There's abundant sun. Letting people use solar ovens where there's abundant sun is a no-brainer, really, because the sun does the cooking for you, and it's not dangerous. For handicapped people like your brother and others in the camp, it's the safest way to cook because there is no fire. I hope somebody listening will say, let's continue, let's push forward. My organization is still working in Kakuma Camp, which is a sister camp to Dadaab. And it's called Solar Cookers International. And the other organization is Solar Household Energy, which you can find information about. And I think the people that organize the program will connect with my website. Thank you for your good work.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Are there others with questions? I thought I saw, okay. Rabia? Good to see you again.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
First, I want to say thank you so much for your presentation. It was truly beautiful. I was on my cell phone and had to jump over to the laptop, so I didn't want to unmute or have my video on while I was on my cell phone. But first, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and sharing your struggle with us. And I have 2 questions. The first being, when you were in college and you lacked those resources to really feel like you could be a successful student on the same kind of reasonable schedule as your peers, I'm wondering first how the university could have better helped you. What are the top resources the university could have provided you with? That's my first question. And
Yeah,
okay, I'll hold my second one.
okay, it's really a good question, because if your students, if those teachers, your students are not the same, as they may not come from different background, they all come from different background, and they don't get the same resources. So I wish, when I remember the first day I walked into University of Arizona, I hope they don't pick on me, the first admin, then they give me different flyers, then I have to figure it out from those flyers, how to do admission, all that stuff. After I finish all the paperwork, then I go back to them and they tell me this is. When you see a student like coming back and back and back, maybe they should have directed me to a resource center where people will be able to help me one-on-one. Because a lot of people who are non-English, non-native speakers, they do well with one-on-one than just providing for them flyers in handy. If you sit with them and you tell them go to that center, and there's someone who's going to sit down with you and go over with you what you need to know, that could have took a lot of pressure from me. And I hope there was also specific programs, minority students, or maybe even those whose English is not their first language, that we all know, that we know that they may struggle. So I wish there was someone that could have sat with me one-on-one. And I'll share with you why I succeeded in college. Only one reason. There was a volunteer by the name, she only gave me her initial, her name was DJ Foster. She worked with me for the 4 years I was in college. Every time I do a research paper, she reads for me, and then she highlights, and then I have to go and do the correction. She was a retired, and I met with her in the library. And then always she sees me in the library, leaving very late, always there. And then one day we talked and she asked me where I'm from, and I told her this and this. And then we became friends, and then she was able to help me. I wish we had, I know, and I'm sure a lot of students dropped out that went through what I want. And even some of my friends that we came to the US, they were not able to finish college because they were not able to get the resources or even the support that they needed. And I hope we always open our eyes, not only what's around us, but also those who are coming outside.
Thank you. And I had a part two, which was in the classroom, particularly in the high school classroom, when we teach about refugees. Do you have any instructional strategies for how to connect the experiences of refugees from Europe with refugees from Myanmar, from African countries, from Middle Eastern countries like Syria and Jordan and Palestine, and just how do you make it in the classroom a united struggle, really a human struggle?
I always ask, whenever I do classroom presentations about refugees, I ask the students, what comes to your mind when you hear about refugees? Then I have them write down everything. Every student will write down what comes to their mind. And you will see a common thing, they will see fleeing, they will see mothers, they will see children, they will see. So one thing I always tell them is those refugees, we share one thing, we are all refugees. So I always ask them, why are we refugees in the first place? Is it by choice or is it by circumstances? And I think it is a tough question in one way, and it's hard for everybody to make people who came from different background, even who may flee from different reasons, for different reasons. Some people fled for different reasons from their country, but when we all came to other countries, we all refugees to that country. And actually, it has to start from us refugees who lived through those processes, that came through with that process. We have to explain to the rest of the world how we came being a refugee and how we would like to be addressed or how we would like to be directed. So I will always give a suggestion. Let them decide, let a Ukrainian refugee present himself in comparison to a refugee from Somalia, and then a refugee from Syria, and then a refugee from Afghanistan, and let themselves come with a conclusion, common ground. I think that is my suggestion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Omar. One of my students have a question. Cameron Adams with his hand up. Go ahead, Cameron.
So Cameron actually sent me the link for this call, and I don't know why it put me in the link as Cameron, but that's not me. My name is Joshua Hughes. I just want to say thank you again for your wonderful presentation. It was very, very, very informational, as well as introspective. You know, I got to think about your story as it relates to myself and some of the things that I've been through. My question was, so as a student that wishes to eventually travel to Africa for a service-based project, and as well as a cultural immersion experience, where would you recommend I begin doing research as to what location and how I would go about doing so?
Good. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us. And I'm glad you were able to get something out of my story. And one thing I always tell is at some point in life, every human being will struggle. Every person in this world. That's why we are human beings. So what matters is, are we going to give up, or we are going to work hard and fight over the struggle? We have to work hard and never give up or lose hope. You know, in my situation, when I was working with UN and helping these people, I get to meet people who struggled more than I did, but that people that were challenged more than I was challenged. So if I come back to your question, there are many organizations that do international work, including ourselves. Refugee Strong is going to start a program next year. We will be taking volunteers to the refugee camp. And specifically, I'm now already admitted 2 volunteers I'm taking in this summer. That actually 3. One will be a teacher that will be training teachers. She's from Texas. The other 2 work with me with Refugee Strong. So because we opened a library in the depth for the first time, our organization did open a library. So we want to attend the opening ceremony and also do some, and also give see around the camp, how it looks like being in the refugee camp. And if you are interested, such things, people can look into our website. It's called refugeestrong.org. There's a contact sheet that you can fill in. And you can email me, even if it's not with Refugee Strong, maybe I can email you back with other resources or other programs that may be available to you. But in the near future, we will actually be starting, and I would love to connect with different colleges where we have your class can travel 1 week to the refugee camp if they are interested, and we will make that happen. Our organization will make that happen with the help of UN, where we can travel Thursday and you can come back next Thursday. 1 week program where you get to see how life looks like in refugee camp. Because I can tell you many things, million things, but when you see it for your eyes, it's totally different. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. I'm definitely interested in that opportunity. Do you think you could repeat the name of the website one more time?
I will put it in the chat. It's called refugeestrong.org. Let me see to everyone, right? I don't know, someone else can do it maybe.
Thank you. Thank you.
I sent it to Brenda. Refugeestrong.org.
A really important question came through on the chat from Elizabeth Obister in terms of, you mentioned 3 important things that you want people to take from this.
Helen,
Yeah.
I think we are over time.
Okay.
We're over time, so
Okay.
you don't want to take from the next speaker. That was
Yep,
just
yep.
amazing,
Thank you very
Omar.
much.
So many questions. We are around for you to funnel questions to Omar. So at the Center for African Studies. So we will stop now so that we can move on to the next speaker. Thank you so much, Omar.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And people can go to my website if they have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That was an absolutely wonderful presentation and humbling on top of it. I am very pleased now to introduce our next speaker, who is the author of the book Drawn Across Borders, True Stories of Human Migration. George Butler is an award-winning artist and illustrator specializing in travel and current affairs. His drawings done in situ are in pen, ink, and watercolor. In August 2012, George walked from Turkey across the border into Syria, where as a guest of the rebel Free Syrian Army, he drew the scenes in ink rather than with a camera. Civil war damaged small and empty town of Azaz. Over the last 10 years, his desire to record scenes in ink rather than with a camera has meant he has witnessed some extraordinary moments. Refugee camps in Bekaa Valley, in the oil fields in Azerbaijan, in Gaza with Oxfam, in Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Myanmar, and in a neo-Nazi murder trial in Munich on an oil rig in the North Sea down a Ghanaian gold mine. The list goes on. George's recent trip to Mosul was published in The Guardian and described life in some of the liberated areas of West Mosul despite the abhorrent conditions. His drawings have been published by The Times London, Monocle, New York Times, The Guardian, BBC, CNN, Der Spiegel, ARD Television, Germany, and NPR. His work has been shown in the Imperial War Museum in the North and the V&A Museum, which also holds some of his work. He has also set up a foundation which I guess no one could have the experiences that people have with refugees without setting it up. He has set up the Hands Up Foundation, whose aim was to remind the people they had met in Syria that they had not been forgotten. The Hands Up Foundation supports salaries of professionals inside Syria and has to date raised 4.5 million pounds. I'm very pleased to also mention that George is coming to us today from Ukraine, where I'm sure he is doing as much good as he can. Thank you very much, George.
Hi, everybody. I am, yeah, that was a very nice introduction. I shall try and add on top of it, but yeah, apologies for any sort of unprofessionalism in the way that I'm coming across. I'm in Ukraine, have been for the last month, and have been making more drawings and sharing them with various news organizations, something on the Guardian website last week, and I'm doing some work for the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting, and also the Virginia Quarterly Review. So there'll be some stuff on your side of the world very soon. I'm going to talk about my book, Drawn Across Borders. I didn't know when I was making these drawings that over the last 10 years that I would be in fact writing a book about migration, and I realized that there are lots of people on this call who have experienced it well firsthand, lived it, and known it more than perhaps I have. But where I think the book does contribute is that it is it's an outside visual view, but in the words of the people that I met along the way. So whereas as far as possible, they're the stories of people like Mama Nazak, Khalid, Ahmed, Abdullah, all people who moved around the world. And when I met them, they told me what they were doing. The other thing to mention probably before I start as a disclaimer is that I think when I met all these individuals, there were significant moments for me because they were open and honest and brilliant and great characters and fun and silly and all the things that you expect from humans, and they were significant for me. But many of the stories in the book tries to make this out at the end. Many of their stories continue long beyond the 24 hours sometimes that I knew them, and that is something that's worth pointing out. I think I got back in touch with a few of them recently, Mama Nazak in particular, who I met 10 years ago, and her story continues in Istanbul, where she's still struggling to find medicine for her son. Most of the men in her family have been killed in Syria, and it's an extraordinary situation. So I'm going to flick through a few images. I think it's just saying only hosts can share content. I think you guys have got the images, or I can share them.
One moment. You should be able to share now.
Great. Let's see if I can find it. Hang on. So I'm just trying to do this off my. So I'm just trying to do this off my phone and just share a PDF.
I also have your slides and I could share them and you could just tell me when to advance.
That would be great. Then
Okay,
I can,
I'll get that up here. If I can get permission to share also, Anya.
Thanks, Susan.
Sure.
You have permission, Susan.
Okay, 1 second.
Well, whilst that happens, I just sort of talk briefly about
yeah, it's going to take a second.
What I do. So I'm an artist, an illustrator, and I've spent a lot of time making drawings around the world for magazines and newspapers, which I realize sounds an odd thing to do because, of course, the question is, well, why don't you just take photographs? And the answer is, for telling stories, as you all know, and Omar's already sort of talked about a little bit, is that we need time to spend with people and comprehend their situations. And that's very important, of course, when you're trying to teach people about them as well. So the drawing has really become a way of sitting with people who I never thought I would meet. And the book is about that. All of these images were originally aimed at being in the news. Drawing was a formula well before photography came along. So I hope it's sort of got value, and I'm putting that into practice at the moment in Ukraine, which perhaps I'll talk about a bit more at the end. So the first image is the cover, and I guess the significance of this, although I didn't know at the time, was that there are, I think, 272 million international migrants around the world at the moment, and these are the stories of 12 of them. And I believe that is going to be a significant issue over the next 100 years with population increase. We already know the statistics, and we know the sort of predictions of how people are going to move around the world, but it is relevant to talk more and more about the individual stories. How do you make those enormous numbers come across in classrooms and indeed in parliaments and assemblies around the world? So particularly in the case of the United States and the United Kingdom, we are two countries. I say we. I'm from England, and I'll speak for England, and anyone else can speak for America. But in the UK, migration is always something that is wanted of England. Everybody wants to get to England. They don't necessarily know why, but it is a place that has had a good reputation for doing the right thing for a long time. We're also an island, and have been lucky enough to be in a politically stable environment. So we've never really understood why at some point in your life you might want to move. But the reality for the rest of the world, as I found it, is that migration is a very ordinary thing. It's, of course, one of the things that society is based on. And you can expect, if you go to Tajikistan or Afghanistan or Iraq or West Africa, to move at some point in your life to better your life. And that is a very ordinary thing. You may move back, you may not. And so this book explores that from the point of view of someone who lives on an island that most people won't move around. And the first image on the cover is probably one of the most significant for me, in that this was a refugee camp in Greece, 2016. Huge numbers of Syrians, Iraqis, Afghans moving across Europe, following the Balkan route, and trying to get into all of those countries: Greece, Serbia, Belgrade, Germany, and at the same time as all of those countries not being able to build fences fast enough. And so this first image shows a refugee standing, or a migrant standing. The old piece of barbed wire was sort of broken down where people have crossed it, and this new fence has been built behind it, and that now blocks the railway line. And I don't know if anybody's been to the Edamani refugee camp, sort of transfer camp, as I think it was described at the time, since been knocked down and moved on somewhere else, but because it received too much bad press. But it was a pretty soulless, hopeless place. There was great hope when I was in Syria for better things to come. But by the time you got to the Greece Fyrom border, then it seemed very difficult to go forwards, and nobody wanted to go backwards. So there was this sort of flux, and it was a very sad place. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. There's about 15 of these, so I'm just going to talk through two or 3 minutes at a time. If anybody wants to ask questions as we go along, that's also absolutely fine by me. Might help the flow your end and mine. This was a situation. I suppose each chapter in the book, I really tried to disband a sort of piece of misinformation, if you like, about migration. And in the UK, we are very familiar with that because, of course, there are many myths about migration. There's too much of it. People take up jobs. They work for less money, and therefore local people can't get jobs. And so each chapter tries to address one of these issues. And in this case, this is a scene in Mosul, in West Mosul, in 2017. I was working there as a journalist, as an artist, reporter, and I'd sat down on the street to draw. I'd been given a seat and as always, a cup of tea, and this scene began to unfold in front of me. It's Abdul Hamid's house. He had been, there'd been a fight between the Iraqi special forces and some members of ISIS. Four members of ISIS had run out of the mosque and into his home. And as was the case at the time, the fighting often stopped, and an airstrike is called in to the place where the fighters were now hiding. That happened to be a couple of homes along this street, and Abdul and his family were caught up in it. His mother was killed, so two of his brothers and one of their wives. And this scene is a month later. He and his friends have come back to see what has been, see if anything is left. So you've almost got this sort of chandelier in the front room still swinging. The taxi, their only form of income, also been caught. And at the same time, he's standing there telling me this story. And it was incredibly moving. But one of the things he did say was that for the internally displaced people, there was lots of support, provided you wanted to live in a refugee camp. And for those who were trying to repair their homes or make most of life where they'd always known it, that was not the case. And one of the great myths, always, especially in the UK, is that that these people, in inverted commas, want to come to England or to Europe and they'll never go home. Whereas the reality of that is not true very often. That is exactly what happens. So yeah, can I have the next slide? Again, this is in the same town, and I suppose many of the pictures in the book aren't just portraits of people, they are trying to add context. And this was a scene down a street called Al Nabi Street, I think. The front line is the other end of it. As always, civilians paying the greatest cost for these wars. Often, all said and done, it's them that pay the greatest toll. And I guess the severity, the kind of correlation, there must be some correlation between the severity of the fighting and the numbers of people that are willing to move. Certainly seeing that in Ukraine at the moment. I don't know how much people want me to talk about some of these images, but I mean, there are some interesting things, some stories behind some of them. There are lots of reasons why cars were stacked up in West Mosul, and as always, it's a journalist's job to work out what's true and what's not. But one is that people burnt them so that ISIS couldn't use them as car bombs. One is that they were just bulldozed into place so that the streets were blocked, and it made moving much more difficult. A lot of the Iraqi army and bombed most of the junctions in West Mosul so that the Islamic State couldn't move freely around. They would have had to get out of cars or make new routes. So there was just a hole in every junction. And much of the damage, ironically, was done by the Iraqi forces trying to remove ISIS from their town. So it's a sort of strange situation to have, where you're having to damage your own city in order to win a battle. And these drawings and other drawings in the book were about that time. Can I have the next slide, please? This is a little boy called Ahmed, although he may be called something else in the book. I've now got so confused. We decided in our wisdom that it would be a good idea to rename all the characters in the book, but they'd already all been published, so it really was difficult to work out why we'd done that. Anyway, in real life, he's called Ahmed, and his father is called Yassar, and he was caught in a airstrike in northern Syria, and this was an hospital, Bab al-Hawa Hospital. 72 hours earlier, he'd lost his mother and his brother, and I met him, if you can call it that, in a children's ward. And as I walked in, the nurse sort of took the bandages off and wanted to show me the stump of his naked body to make sure that I sort of fully comprehended the situation. His father was inconsolable at the end of the bed, saying that nothing could make a difference, art can make a difference. And I was sort of really torn between trying to tell these stories and feeling like an intruder, I suppose. And there was a man in the corner of the room whose son was in the other room, and he spoke English, and he sort of reassured me and said, this is exactly what we need the world to see. And it's what we're seeing at the moment in Ukraine. although yes, as Omar points out, slightly different reaction depending on the color of your skin. So these, I suppose, the stories of people that I met, and the most important ones that I think that I think need to be shared. I suppose one of the misconceptions about Syria at the time was that the first thing that all Syrians did was to leave the country, which actually wasn't the case at all. There were huge numbers of people that moved around the inside of the country, and the last choice, the very last thing to do was leave to Turkey or to Lebanon. And all the people that I met in this book, I think it's fair to say that leaving or making the journey, either if it was migration or as a refugee or as an economic migrant, was never the first choice. It was a choice that they were driven to do by any number of reasons that we all know about. But certainly in Syria at the time, Syria was the place that they called home, and even now, 10 years on, wherever they are, home is still very much Syria. So yeah, maybe let's have the next slide, please. This is in Belgrade. I don't know if anybody had visited this place. It was a warehouse behind the railway station. It was a subject of many a photojournalist photograph. And when I look at this picture, I can still remember the smoke was so dense from all the fires they were having inside to try and keep warm, burning the railway sleepers, which were covered in tar, burning newspapers and cardboard, burning clothes that had been donated, anything to stay warm, anything to stay off the concrete. And I remember saying in the book that there's sort of two types of cold, and one is the one that we all know, which is that you put your coat on because you know you can walk from one building to another, and the cold when you have to sit outside in it. And standing outside and drawing was a moment of feeling what it must be like to try and live on the move without any support for months at a time. Most of the people in this building at the time were from Pakistan and Bangladesh, actually. Lots of people assumed that they were from Syria and Afghanistan, but they weren't. So I think this building's since been knocked down, a bit like the Edamani refugee camp, because it's easier to knock it down than it is to address the actual issue. So someone told me it's not there anymore. What else can I tell you about Belgrade? Nothing other than it was a moment when sort of Europe felt incredibly worried about people getting closer and closer. It was winter, it was snowing, there were long queues, food kitchens were popping up for volunteers, and suddenly Europe was host to large numbers of refugees again. That is, which year was this? 2016? I think it was in January, off the top of my head. Are there any other questions that I should ask as we go along?
I think we plan to take the questions mostly at the end.
Okay, and then I will keep going. Could I have the next slide, please? This, yeah, we can get rid of that box. Thank you. this is the little town in the north of Syria called Azaz. And just to give you some context to the image, I was trying to make my way as a reportage illustrator and headed to Turkey and then on to a little place called Kilis, where I think we sort of expected an exodus of people pouring across the border, which of course all the newspaper front pages had hoped for. But the reality was that Turkey took huge numbers of refugees from Syria, and they were dealt with very well by the UN, put into minibuses, moved without journalists photographing them, and obviously not an ideal situation to be in a camp on those borders, but it was very much out of bounds, I guess, and it was for me as an artist working for a newspaper. So I walked across the border from Turkey into Syria, 4 kilometers of well, you go through one checkpoint, which you could do at the time on your passport, Turkish checkpoint, and then walk 4 kilometers past the old duty-free shop, 4 or 5 empty lanes of traffic. I had to go looking for the Syrian passport man. I'm not sure if I actually ever found him. And then up to the next checkpoint, which had a new free Syrian flag above the top of it, and a bloke in a sort of army vest, jeans, with a Kalashnikov, and he pointed me into an office where I met Abu Yusuf, who spoke fluent English, of course, and said, "Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? Can we get your translator? Can we get your car?" And so I spent a couple of days in Azaz, which is probably a town of about 60,000 people at the time, 2012 this was. 60,000 people, but of which 55,000 had left, so probably 4,000 or 5,000 people left in the town. And then the rest, as I said before, some had moved to Turkey, but many moved to family members in the countryside. And then when that part got dangerous, we'd move somewhere else. And that was the pattern of behavior in Syria at the time. So you got huge numbers of IDPs, and then slowly the refugee figures increased to what they are now. And I suppose we're not talking about Syria because we're talking about Afghanistan, not talking about Afghanistan because we're talking about Ukraine, but the reality is that all of these conflicts will go on and affect those people for the next generation. This image meant a lot to me because it was the first time that I felt I was doing my job, but also because there are 3 kids playing on a tank in their hometown. The fighting had stopped 10 days before. There were also a couple of old men sort of examining this monstrosity that had parked up, burnt out. And I guess one of the factors, of the many factors why people move around the world, and war being the most sort of visual of them. What else can I tell you about this? That's probably it. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so we're gonna, I think the next 5 or 6 are about Ukraine, which is obviously very present at the moment. They are, how am I going to talk about this? I've been in Ukraine for 3 weeks, working for various magazines and newspapers. I arrived via Odessa and then spent about some time there and then some time in Kyiv. And I suppose what is interesting is that the huge numbers of people have moved from east to west. Most have gone out via, well, to Lviv, and then the rest on to Poland, Warsaw, and across Europe. That way, the largest number to Poland, and then I think to Germany has hosted the next largest number at about 120,000. I think 1.3 million people remain. So I guess what I'm seeing here is the effects of what happens when huge numbers of people leave, and that is everything that's left behind. So I'll just talk through these. They're not always about migration, but I think it's relevant, and I hope it's interesting. These are the one thing I will say about the Ukrainian unity is that everybody is left behind is now contributing to the war effort in one shape or another, and there's this extraordinary feeling of community and strength and resilience, identity around what it means to be Ukrainian, a sort of wall of resilience on behalf of the rest of Europe and of the world to Russia, the kind of sort of easy and very obvious enemy. Yeah, so this is a scene. Vladimir is the closest man to you. These are kind of the emergency electric guys who ordinarily might be fixing pipes, electric cables underneath sort of main roads in Kyiv, but now are going from site to site, bomb damage, strike sites, places where there's been lots of fighting, and trying as best they can for their company called DTEC to keep Ukraine up and running and put it back together again. So this is sort of mundane scene, I agree, for a war zone, but I suppose that is kind of where my work best fits, and that is to tell a more common experience than just the ones that we see on our front pages. Can I have the next slide? This is, so the other thing that I would say about Ukraine at the moment is that there are many people which the option of leaving, well, there isn't an option of leaving. I met an old lady today in a part of town that had been heavily bombed, and when we drove past, I was with a Ukrainian couple who were helping me. She was sitting outside and quite cheerful, but we went over to talk to her and followed her inside, so not able to leave. She's too old, but followed her inside, and she was sitting, by the time we got in there, up the stairs on the first floor. Both sets of windows, front and back, of the apartment had been blown out. Her house is completely destroyed. Cactuses have been long dead and rotting on the floor. Mess everywhere, bedroom covered in glass, everything blown off the walls. Wallpaper being ripped off by the blast. And she's sitting by the front door in the dark, no electricity, no water, holding the front door shut on a rope. And it was incredibly moving, but also a very real issue at the moment here, because there are lots of old people who have not got very much. Same with some of the disabled communities here, and many of them don't have the option to move, and so they remain without help, or volunteers are helping them deliver them food and keep them in these completely inappropriate places, open to the elements. And that was, well, sort of very fresh in my mind. I haven't got an image of it, but something to share with you. The image in front of you is of a scene in Odessa, the market still open, and ladies selling radishes, flowers, underwear on the street. And I guess it was a sort of something to be positive about in amongst it all. These great characters. Again, the rest of the town and all the towns that I've been in are pretty desolate. Difficult to get a taxi. It's sometimes difficult to find food, but this scene, and also you notice a lot of dogs. It's huge. There's lots of pet stories coming out of Ukraine at the moment, and a lot of them have also made the move towards Lviv. Can I have the next slide, please? This is a nice story, but a bad drawing. I suppose with my job, what do I suppose? I guess the thing about making drawings like this is that it's 50% the story and 50% the image. If you can get them both right at the same time, then that happens very rarely. But I guess what I try not to do is let the kind of vanity that's very easy to have as an artist, or the perfection of trying to get something perfect, not overcome the story. And in this case, I was sitting in the, which train station was it? Odessa train station. Late at night, it's curfew, so we all had to be in there by 8 p.m. Some of the trains didn't leave till midnight. Lots of people had either left the country and were coming back, or were moving out for the first time. And a lot of the trains were busy. It's one of the more safer ways to move around Ukraine at the moment. And in the sort of dark, this guy called Vladimir got out his guitar and asked someone if they had the lyrics to the national anthem on their phone, and began to play sort of eerie sort of but beautiful music in the dark. And then the sort of Soviet style guard came up to ask him to stop, and everybody said no, please let him carry on. And there was a great moment of hope. His friend was handing around pink tulips, whoever, and giving one to all the ladies in the railway in the station until she ran out. And I sat and drew, and it was sweet. He was going back to see his parents at one of the stops along the way. And that is happening a lot. I've since got the train across Ukraine again, and many people a month in are moving back to collect some of their belongings and leave again. I think the thing that I learned, and maybe this book is maybe this is something that maybe in fact everybody knows this already, but this book is just about things that I learned around the world. But one of the things that I realized was that when you leave your home, and Zelensky sort of spoke a little bit about this in the war, when you leave your home for the first time, of course, in your mind, you think it's only going to be for a couple of days or a week. I guess that's the case with any disaster. We thought that COVID would only last 2 weeks and then a month, and we couldn't bring ourselves to comprehend that it might go on for 2 or 3 years. And that's very much true of the people I met in this book. They packed their bags thinking they would be gone for a month, so they packed their bags with or that was just the stuff they had in their car or their pockets, and they thought they would be home soon. And as we now know, in many of the cases, that isn't the case. And at some stage, there is this realization that although you can't draw a line under your life, you have to find a way to move forwards, and perhaps, and that is often in another place. That hasn't happened to Ukraine yet, and I'm not suggesting for a second that it will, but 10 million people is a lot to move around, and certainly some of them won't be going back to their homes. So, and that is, we are watching that happen at the moment. It's happening down the road from me today. I was in the metro last, and perhaps the next slide might be about the metro. It's not, but I'll talk about the metro anyway. I was in the one of the metro stations here today. I slept there last night because during the day there's about probably 100 people, and you walk in, you go about big Soviet style station down stone steps, beautiful pillars, big swing doors, and then all the way down the platform, and in both trains on either side are people sleeping, and they're well set up. They've been there for 35 days. They've got their mattresses so they're high off the ground because it's so cold. They've got sleeping bags. They've got cats and dogs tied to their beds. There's a doctor there called Sergey that I met and spent some time with him. There was a masseuse who was out of a job, and she's now massaging some of the kids. There's a university professor also out of work, and she's just teaching kids how to play with puppets. And in the evening, everybody comes back into the bunker to sleep because I say bunker, I mean metro, and so it fills up, and there's this sort of community, but also there's a sort of distance. Everyone's trying to have their own space, but these are the people that are trying to stay as close to home as possible, or they don't have a choice, don't have anywhere to go, or they've been put down there by a family member because they believe that they're safer there. And these are the scenes which happen strangely frequently. These are the scenes that we thought we'd committed to the history books after World War II. I don't know if anybody can remember the war artist Henry Moore, but he drew people sleeping in the London Underground. And we thought in the 50s, then the 60s and 70s that those were scenes of the past, and yet more and more often this is happening. The scene in front of you is actually a queue in Kyiv. About a week ago, there were lots of, one of the things that the government, one of the tools that the government has is to do a 36 or 48 hour lockdown as a way of catching some of the Russian saboteurs that are operating in their capital. So this is the queue for food before one of those lockdowns. And depending on where you are, food and water has been difficult to come across. Sorry, I saw a question pop up, lost my train of thought. So this is that scene, and a couple of kids on their phones, a lot of people on their mobile phones, and again, people queuing with their pets. So this is a sort of, I guess why the Western world has reacted so sort of strongly to the Ukrainian issue, is because it's not confusing, and it's not Middle Eastern, and there's no Sunni or Shia to be confused around. This is a Russian, it's like a sort of movie. The Russians are bad, everyone else is good, and we all know which side to be on. It's a very closely European country with people shopping in supermarkets and having pets and owning cars, and is a very easy side to comprehend. And that's certainly what I have witnessed here. Can I have the next slide? What are we on, 11? Yeah. How am I doing for time, by the way? I can't see my clock, sorry.
Yeah, we are coming close to the end. Actually, you started a little bit late, so we've made allowances for that. And so
Okay.
maybe 3-4 minutes.
Perfect. Well, this image is just another one from Ukraine. Don't have to spend too long on it. It's part of the war effort I was talking about. Young volunteers, mainly women. Again, as we saw in the Second World War, history repeating itself. In the Odessa food hall, a very trendy part of town, you can see the adverts for Aperol Spritz. The wine is still in the fridge, the pepper pots are still on the tables, but these guys are organizing cooking, collection of food from local civilians and businesses, and distributing it to their army, the army which they put every faith into, and if they don't, they will not have a country, and that's how they see it. So you can imagine the feeling of that as a purpose. What's the next slide, please? Okay, I'll spend 3 minutes talking about this woman, and then I'll answer some questions. This, I guess, is a woman who slightly took my breath away this week. I met her because I was standing at a missile strike of a bus in Kiev, and two ladies were there, Valentina and Mila, and we started talking to them through a translator, and then they sweetly said, "You do realize we speak English?" And they were brilliant, and they were out of a job because of the war, but delivering aid to anybody that they could find. And again, some of the older people aren't able to get downstairs. So they said, well, we're about to deliver some aid to this woman. Maybe you'd like to come and talk to her. And we went to this block of flats, up 4 flights of stairs. We met her daughter, who was 79, and she invited us in to see her mother, Madame Olga, age 99. And if you want a sort of lived experience or a view of someone who's moved around the world, then this is the person to talk to. She was very nervous of having anybody in her house because she always thought that whenever someone came, they were going to take her away. And she was born in 1923. She survived the Holodomor, the Great Famine, so inflicted on the Ukrainian people. Millions of them died. Her father was sent away for collectivization, and she was captured by the Nazis, taken to a town in Germany where she was a slave with 2 of her friends. She was made to eat worms. The story goes sort of bad to worse. And at the end of the war, as she later found out, it was 1945. As she later found out, it was in Dresden, which was completely destroyed. There was no way of getting back to Ukraine, and so her and her friends began to walk. And on the way, she met a young USSR soldier who she married, and her daughter was in the flat with her. Her granddaughter is now living, I think I'm right in saying, in Germany, with her great granddaughter, who's age 7. And so I guess she's 100 in August. And I guess if there's any person that sort of encapsulates the circularity of migration around the earth, it's Madame Olga, who would have thought that, having lived through the Second World War, that she would have to live through it again and see her family move away. and they may or may not move back. And that is something that we in Europe and the rest of the world, I think, need to come to terms with. I think I'll stop there for the sake of time and allow some questions.
Yes, thank you so much, George, for taking time to speak to us, and our hearts and minds are certainly with you and the Ukrainian people. We have 3 or 4 questions. I will group them together. We have a question from Marion Berry about what is the sense of trauma and resilience did you sort of feel when you were working with your subjects? There was another question, what year was the Belgrade picture? Number 3. Sure.
Well, was the resilience question related to Ukraine or just sort of in general?
In general, with the pictures, the feeling of trauma and resilience in dealing with your subjects.
Yeah. I mean, I think the greatest criticism of illustration and probably of myself is that I think I am always biased in favor of the person sitting in front of me. I'm not a cutthroat journalist. I'm not kind of asking difficult questions and double checking facts. But the resilience of Mama Nazak in the book, who, I mean, I will never forget, heartbreaking to sit in front of me, tears in her eyes, telling me about how one of her sons was killed and 2 were injured. And that was one of the reasons I started with some friends this little foundation. But I always feel, to make a sort of crass comparison and also to do it quickly, I can see you're itching to ask the next question, Helen, that drawing brings out a great part in people, because the front page is the sort of horror movie. We almost watch it to be shocked. We're expected to be shocked, and then we are, and we tell that story when we get home. Drawing allows me to go backstage with the cast, sit down, and I mean, this is a crass comparison, but at least for a moment, think that it wasn't true. No, in the case of Syria and Afghanistan, Ukraine, the horror movie turns out to be true, but there is a moment of hope, and that's the part that this book also focuses on. Really,
very quickly, last 2 questions.
Yeah.
Someone is asking, what age appropriate, what grade would you suggest that teachers use your book?
We pitched it at 8 to 14. I very much had my younger brother in mind. When I wrote this, he's 12, and we did with year 6 in the UK, we did 19 year 6-year-olds the other day, and they produced artwork that reacted to it, and I haven't done a lot of work with kids, but I was amazed by the grown-upness, diversity of their questions, and it really made me think that that was actually its purpose.
I have a student that's asking very quickly, what's one thing that you would like your audiences to take away from your book?
Very good question. I think I mentioned it before, and it's in the bit at the end of the book, and that is that these stories go on for years and years and years. The experience of moving your home is not over in a month. And if you're thinking about housing Ukrainians or making donations, then please do so, but also know that it's just the beginning. 2.5 million people in Poland is really is kind of life altering move. We don't know when it's going to end.
Okay, thank you very much. My question, but just to take away, with how do you manage not to look away? That's not to answer, that's just to reflect on. Thank you very much, George.
Good question.
We appreciate your book, your work, and your struggle.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. We're very grateful, and we wish you safe travels and to continue to be an inspiration in this way.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to alert that we have we had scheduled a 10-minute break, for which we asked forgiveness for having gone straight through it. But at the same time, I think the content is so much worth it, and our sustained attention, that our next speaker needs to have her allotted time. I will be sharing at the very end, very briefly, I'll be sharing some strategies for using the books that we worked up. And as well as I've mentioned a couple of times, there's an entire resource folder that I've shared the link with a couple of times here. I'll do it again before the end. Where you will find many, many things in general, but 2 whole sets of materials that are related directly to these books. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Professor Rochelle Davis, who is Associate Professor of Anthropology and the Sultanate of Oman Chair. She is also the Principal Investigator on our U.S. Department of Education Title VI grant as funding a National Resource Center on the Middle East and North Africa. This is the grant that funds this activity, the books that you will receive, and the K-14 outreach all over the community here. Dr. Davis's research is on refugees, war, and conflict for many, many years, particularly in Syrian and Iraqi refugees and internally displaced persons. Since 2010, her research projects have included training refugees and local community members to develop questions and conduct interviews. To date, these projects have amassed over 300 in-depth interviews with refugees and migrants in the region. She's also senior researcher on a joint project between Georgetown University and the International Organization for Migration grant, conducting a mixed methods panel survey of over 3,000 Iraqi households displaced since 2014 by ISIL, or also called Daesh. Professor Davis is currently writing a book on the role of culture in the U.S. military wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, based on research she's conducted since 2006. Using interviews with U.S. military service members and Iraqis, as well as governmental and military policy and strategy documents, cultural training material, journalist reporting, and soldier memoirs, she focuses on the narratives about Iraqis, Afghans, Arabs, and Muslims. Her analysis explicates the conundrums of being tasked to be culturally sensitive in a military occupation, and the personal and collective experiences of war. And what I always find so impressive about Rochelle's work is that she doesn't just do it from a scholarly detachment, but she does it with full heart and with the desire to help the refugee situation through her work. Welcome, Professor Davis.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
And you can see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay.
If you'd like to remove that right-hand panel, then just expand it as much as possible. Sometimes it gives the note screen when you try to do. Yeah, that's great. That's perfect.
Okay. I can't see anyone or myself, which is also good, but yeah, just let me know.
We see you. And
okay. So just interrupt me, because I won't see the chat either. So interrupt me if I'm either talking too fast or doing something I shouldn't be doing, or otherwise, or you can't see this. I just want to thank everyone for being here today, and it's really an honor to be with you, and really to follow both Omar Mohamed and George Butler and their amazing works and their book. And so I'm going to try to kind of think about how their books and the topics that they raise can really be part of our role as teachers, and what we can do. And as I was reading George's book, at the end, he says, there's this quote: "The process of making this book quickly confirmed that there are many unresolved issues as to how we respond to migration." And I think that that's a really important thing that we can bring to our teaching, is that this is not easy, that it is not resolved, that there are not necessarily answers, and that it is going to sort of raise a lot of issues with students,
And I noticed that Duong Nguyen asked a question about sort of how to address these issues in these books, because they will raise sensitive issues. And I think one of the things I'm going to come to in my presentation is really to think about history, and because so many of, I mean, as George pointed out, so many of these issues that we will be that you talk about have been addressed historically as well, have been problems historically, and you'll see that in my presentation. And so that's one way to kind of keep these things connected. You know, these things happened in the past, these things are happening now. How might we respond differently, or how do we think, or how are we responding similarly? I think another good thing that I try to do with my students is just really to talk about our emotions and how these things make us feel. And it's hard. I mean, I'm not saying that part is easy, and you may not even be able to do that. But if we don't talk about how these things make us feel, then we all go home and deal with them when we get home. So sometimes it's good to talk about them in the classroom as well, if you can. So I'm going to talk about sort of three topics, and I'll try to be super, go through these. One, I think that helps us sort of deal with this issue of the sort of unresolved way we think about migration and displacement, is that it allows us to address the moral and political issues of a particular time, or, you know, of the moment. And overall, I think we just always need to remember that human migration and movement is normal, and that it's just, it happens, and it's happened all the time. And I'll talk about that. I'll talk about some definitions of movement so that we can think about what migration it means in the bigger picture. And then I'll also talk about some big questions and sort of reasons for displacement. I oftentimes bring in a lot of artwork by people who are displaced, so you'll see some of that. And then also finally, this PowerPoint I just sent to Susan and the organizer, so hopefully it will be back up. It will be in your teacher folder, and please feel free to use any of it that you want. And you can also email me if you need. Okay. So I say that human migration is normal just because we know we move. Science tells us that, you know, Homo sapiens sort of came out of Africa and sort of moved around the globe. Religious texts are full of migration stories. In particular, stories of flight from danger. You can think of Judeo-Christian texts, Noah and the Ark, Adam and Eve, Mary and Joseph flee to Egypt. Muslim texts, you have an early Muslim community. They fled Mecca and went to Ethiopia. And then Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad's hijrah to Medina is also seen as a second migration. In the Buddhist text, Buddha travels as a teacher and ascetic. And I'm sure there are others, and, you know, maybe you can offer them to each other to contextualize this. There's some useful teaching resources. I think on this, National Geographic has this Introduction to Human Migration, and then Reimagining Migration talks somewhat about kind of how we think and ways to sort of deal with some of the emotions or other sort of dispositions for a world on the move. So these are both resources. And then I think in this human migration is normal, these two books really offer examples of the struggles that people face today in the world that we live today. And I think if we, you know, those of you that teach history, or those of you that teach about the US, you really know that US history is a history of movement and a history of racialized exclusion. So, you know, we know that Native peoples lived all over North America over a millennia, and they migrated around, they abandoned settlements, they created new ones. We know that European white settlements were established as part of a British and other colonial enterprises. And we think of that in a settler colonial migration context. We know that Africans were brought as enslaved populations, and that is a form of forced migration. For over 200 years that occurred. And then there were open doors for Europeans who were seeking better opportunities or were fleeing religious persecution in Europe. And we oftentimes think of that as an economic migration. And then there were closed doors to Asian migration, both the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1884 and the Asian Exclusion Act of 1924, which had a different formal name that I can't now remember. But these were ones that said no to people coming in. And then we think of refugee resettlement, much more in the late 20th century as an asylum process. So in this human migration is normal sort of moment, I think there's a what I called this a teachable tension. I don't know if that is a fair way to kind of put it out there, but I think in sort of saying that, these are the tensions that are around sort of human migration today, and that is between human movement and the rights to movement. I always, my students come from all over the world, and they have to get visas and things like that, but then they can send money and they can buy things from all over the world as well. And so I think one of the ironies in the world today is how restricted humans are from moving, but how easy it is to move money, goods, weapons, and these and other things around the world. And so we're at a particular time. This is not a in which humans are much more restricted in their ability to move, and it's certainly class-based and citizenship-based. But this tension between human movement and then human rights that are guaranteed by United Nations and the international law, or even rights that are granted by a country, are also sort of part of this tension. And I'll go through some of these things. And then also a country's legal framing, where a country, their laws determine where, how people can move or not move, and people's statuses. So I think part of this tension is also embodied in how we think of the world today. And this map, may be a way that many of us think of the world, but it really is only a map of political entities that changes, from year to year almost, in terms of where these lines exist on the map and what, sort of what colors these countries get designated. Because, this one has South Sudan, which is one of the world's newest countries. For example, I think that was 2011, if I remember correctly. But all of these, so suddenly there's a new line and a new color on a map. But how does that change how people move across now geography? Because I think this is the world that we have, right? Which is a world without these lines, and yet we are constrained by the borders and lines that we put in front of us. So one of the tensions is this where some people believe that human safety and security is what should drive our decisions and policies. And I think you heard that both from Omar Mohamed very eloquently in his answer to some of your questions. And then I think you also heard that from George Butler, that, that how can we not see everyone as human, and how can we not try and save and protect people? And yet we know we don't. And we know that, people, push people out of trains and push, and incarcerate people and don't let people cross borders. And so there's a real movement and of people who want to protect people and not protect borders, for example. And then there are also others who believe that a country, has its borders, and it is only for those people that live within those borders as citizens for them to decide the policies or to enjoy the policies of that. This particular photo, which I think you can probably see down at the bottom, I can't, but this one is from 1919, and it's a US cartoon from the Chicago Tribune about immigration restrictions are going to close the door on the people who are labeled undesirable, and their head is a ticking bomb. And so these kind of tropes, or these ways of portraying immigration as explosive and as volatile, are very long-standing and tried and true. History gives us many lessons about this. I mean, this picture is very painful to put up, and I apologize. This is from the Smithsonian, who has this in their collection, and they put it up as part of who America is and was. But it's useful to remember that the US Border Patrol was created in the wake of this Immigration Act of 1924, which was clearly xenophobic, and which limited the number of Southern and Eastern European immigrants. And of course, this had a huge impact on not only Italians, but also particularly Jewish communities, as in the post-World War I era and right before the rise of Nazi Germany and all that we know happened in the Holocaust. But it really banned immigration from parts of Asia altogether. And so this is the lead-in, as you can imagine, to what happens during World War II when President Roosevelt puts Japanese in incarceration camps on the west coast of the United States. So this appeared in the Washington Post in 2015, and it was a Fortune magazine survey in July of 1938. And the opinion survey was, what is your attitudes towards allowing German, Austrian, and other political refugees to come into the United States? And you will see in July of 1938, 67.4% said, with conditions as they are, we should try to keep them out. So you can imagine us looking back on this today and the decisions that were made about not allowing Jewish and other refugees from Europe fleeing Nazi Germany and the Nazi invasion of Poland and other parts of Europe, and the decisions to turn them away from the United States. And we look back today and think those were the wrong decisions. And yet the public opinion at the time was that this was reflecting in public opinion that the United States borders were closed, and that this reflected public opinion. And the Washington Post put this up in particular because there was, in thinking about what was happening in 2015 with Syrian refugees, and you had a similar reaction of Americans where 61% say that we should not allow refugees from Syria to seek asylum in the United States. And so, you know, we don't necessarily learn from history, but history is there for us to learn from. And so another part of this tension between human movement, human rights, and a country's legal framing is the international, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says, one of the articles, and there's a whole list of them, and you can find them here. This artist, Meredith Stern, did a beautiful sort of illustration of a number of them. Everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law, meaning that they have the right to be, you know, recognized as a person, and not sort of not made illegal or not sort of unprotected, or, you know, the ability to be turned away, or these sorts of things. So there's a lot of this tension between sort of human movement, but then human rights, and then what countries do. And so I'll do this a little bit. I'll detail a few more things. The 1951 Refugee Convention, which is what it's known as, gives refugees the legal right to cross borders, to work in their host country, and to have access to the justice system, among many other rights. And so I put these up here. They also have responsibilities, but these are some of the kind of rights that they have. And I always have my students read the 1951 Refugee Convention. It's really long, but I ask them to sort of just pull some part out of it that is unexpected to them, because I think so few states, well, almost no state does all the articles of the convention, but so few states even sort of do one or two of the articles of the convention that it's really quite stunning. And the United States is not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention. They're a signatory to the 1967 protocols, which update and change it. But there's 145, I think it's 145 state signatories to the convention. But it's really how we think about what happens with displaced people today, and where their protection comes from within an international context. And this, in the book When Stars Are Scattered, the Victoria Jameson and Omar Mohamed book, really kind of, he goes through what it's like to experience that system, right, from his perspective. And his book is so, in my experience, talking to displaced people who live in camps or out of camps and who have tried to navigate those systems, this book reflects it very, very strongly, particularly people living in the global South. But they have constructed this book in a really powerful and very, I think, accurate way. The two international institutions that really kind of protect and think about assisting refugees in the big scale across the globe are the UNHCR. They call themselves the UN refugee agency, but the UNHCR stands for the UN High Commission on Refugees. I think it's High Commissioner on Refugees. And then the other one is the International Organization for Migration, which just joined the United Nations a few years ago. And they, as they said, their slogan is making migration work for all. So they really track migration around the world, both people who are migrating for work as well as people who are internally displaced, because the UNHCR only does refugees and not people who are internally displaced. So there's been a there's both overlap, but then there's also people trying to make sure that everyone who is on the move has some international agency that is kind of at least paying attention to what they are doing. I want to move now to talking about definitions, because one of the things that I find really important to teach to students are how we talk about people who are on the move. At the same time, I find it also really problematic that we lump people into these categories. And yet when you read the news, you need to be able to understand when someone is talking about internally displaced persons, what that means, or refugees, what that means, or migrants, what that means. And so I spend a fair amount of time right in the beginning, just making sure that everybody has the kind of internationally recognized vocabulary. That said, I have some real issues with just talking about people in these kinds of ways, and I'll raise these in a little bit farther. So if we think about migrants, they are the largest group of people, and not migrants just means people who have migrated. You know, it doesn't include people who are refugees or IDPs necessarily. So 281 million people are currently, sort of are counted as international migrants. That's almost 4% of the whole total population of the globe. And they are really thought of as economic migrants. As you can see, some of the ways that they are talked about is that they bring in remittances, that they have, how much it has changed in 20 years is sort of sixfold. And the 5 largest countries who sent remittances, and it is calculated in terms of the amount of remittances, not in terms of the numbers, are India, China, Mexico, the Philippines, and Egypt. And so there are these ideas about migrants as they are economically good, both for the country where they are working, and then the country where they are from, where they are sending remittances back to. And so they're really seen in this very economic sense. The other kinds of migrants who we oftentimes refer to as forced migrants. And so those are people who have been forcibly displaced. So this is the UNHCR report for 2020, which is the statistics from, it comes out in late 2021. So this doesn't include anything to do with Ukraine, obviously. But you can see that there are here 20.7 million refugees. Those are people who have crossed the border of their country. There are 4.1 million people who are asylum seekers. Now they have a different status in the country wherever they are. They categorize Venezuelans displaced abroad somehow differently in this. And then there are 48 million internally displaced people. So those are people who are not living in their homes, but they haven't left the country of the country where they have citizenship or their country of origin. So those are usually people displaced due to earthquakes or wars. Like the majority of Ukrainians today are internally displaced people, although there are millions who have crossed the border into Poland and beyond. And then for those of you that will know something about this, there are 5.7 million Palestine refugees who are under a different mandate. And that's because the UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, was created before UNHCR. And so UN, you can't have 2 jurisdictions over one population. So those 5.7 million are under a different mandate, but this is the one time they get counted in the total population. then those are forcibly displaced persons. Then they have another category called people of concern. And then they add in people who are stateless. And we have stateless people in the United States. I mean, DACA students, for example, are stateless, as are probably their parents. There are people who are returned refugees. There are people who are returned IDPs. So they're just kind of, by people of concern, they're just trying to keep track of them. And then there's another sort of 8.3 million people who are others of concern. I don't know what that exactly is, but anyway, you get a sense that this number, which is 81 million or 82 million, I think, is the largest number they have counted since World War II. Now, we haven't really been counting people since we only started really in World War II and with UNHCR, but this is the largest number we have had since that time, and it's only growing. And I think one of the important things that is a part of thinking about displaced populations today are the differences between the global north and the global south. More than 8 out of 10 refugees are in developing countries, generally a country neighboring to the one that they fled. Like Omar Mohammed's story, they fled from Somalia and went to Kenya. And like the people in the stories in George Butler's book, they didn't, for the most part, go far away. As of 2020, when this came out, 5 countries accounted for 2/3 of the people displaced across borders: Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, South Sudan, and Myanmar. Now I've added another line that there are some sort of 10 million displaced from Ukraine, either in Ukraine or outside of Ukraine. One of the important things that doesn't get talked about much, but is worth thinking about, is what the UN calls protracted displacement. And at this point, not counting the Ukrainians, of course, the vast majority of people are in a situation of protracted displacement, which means more than 5 years displaced. And George Butler talked a lot about that towards the end of his presentation. But what is clear to scholars of displacement is that we are not solving the problems that are displacing people. And one of the things that I really work on with my students is to, and I'll come back to this as well, is that these are political problems that displace people. And we are not solving those political problems so that people can return. And instead, what we often try to do is provide humanitarian solutions. So, we mobilize and we give donations, and, and the international systems, try and protect people, but we are not actually addressing the issues so much that have caused people to flee or feel unsafe, or wars or those sorts of things. So I talk somewhat about the kind of, with my students, about how do we provide, what is the problems with providing humanitarian solutions to political problems, and it's like we're not talking in the same room together. We're like in two different houses or something. One of the issues that I also try and raise, and I'll wrap up in just a couple minutes, is that in the global north, we are also some of the largest arms exporters. If you look at the global share of exports of major arms by the 10 largest exporters, it's the United States, Russia, France, China, and Germany. Those are the largest 5. And yet we do not, as you saw in the previous slide, most of the people who are displaced are being housed in the global south. And so there's also continues to be a real global imbalance in terms of who profits from wars, and yet who ends up having to address the people that suffer the most. Some people have taken this on. For example, this young woman says, we sell weapons that make people flee. They are our responsibility. And so these are some of the actions that people do to help us think about, how are our borders and our state systems and our profits being protectionist, and yet we are profiting from these things abroad. This cartoon from Zapiro, who's a South African cartoonist, is Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and Russia and Putin have had a huge role in propping up the Syrian regime and providing weapons. And so this cartoon is Russian arms sales, and with Putin saying to the Syrian leader, try this one, it's on the house. And Syrians will tell you how brutal the Russians have been in the war in Syria. And I think many of them are really troubled by watching this happen again in Ukraine, and kind of the inaction of the international community about this. So when I use and talk about definitions, it's really important to recognize that words we use change over time, and that they also kind of put people into boxes that make it really hard for them to get out of. And Omar Mohammed's story, both in the book and as he was talking, really talks about what having that refugee label, how kind of painful and difficult that was for him to kind of constantly be thought of as a refugee. And so I think it's also really important to always sort of recognize that we can use words that humanize us rather than make us statistics or illegal or that criminalize us. I personally really try to use the word, for example, when I talk about someone who has come from prison, who has come out of a prison, I try to use the word returning citizen. And people that I'm talking to will say, well, what's a returning citizen? And I say, well, you think about it. And I say, oh, well, it's someone we would used to call like a formerly incarcerated individual, but I want to think of them now as a citizen, that they are here amongst us and that they are part of our responsibility. And so it's become very common now to think of, to use a word that is less negatively loaded and more positively loaded with returning citizen. That's just an example of how we can kind of think about our language. I want to not sort of, I'm not trying to advocate that we be language police and say, you have to say it this way. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying by modeling these kinds of ways of talking, and by making aware that words have these kinds of powers to define for us how we think about people, we should make people aware of that. Is it okay if I take 5 minutes to show this Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Because she's so awesome. Hang on, sorry. Let me see if I can do this smoothly. Don't know if I can because I can't see my screen now. Where'd she go? There she is. Can you see her?
Yes, we see her.
Good, good, okay. And I enabled my sound.
In 1967,
can you hear her?
Almost 50 years ago,
Yes.
my parents lived in Nsukka, a university town in eastern Nigeria. They had 2 small children, a house, a car, friends, a stable life. Then the Nigeria-Biafra War started. Only days later, my parents heard the sound of shelling and gunfire, so frightening, so close, that they had very little time to pack anything before they ran. They left almost all their belongings behind. They ended up in another town, a town already very crowded. They could not find a place to stay. Even the refugee camps were full. My father was desperate. He was worried about being out in the open because of the possibility of air raids. He knew a man who was from that town, a man named Emmanuel Ezike. Emmanuel lived in a cramped house that was full of people, members of his extended family, people whose homes the war had also snatched. My father also knew that it would be very difficult for Emmanuel to accommodate them, very difficult to stretch what was already badly stretched. Still, my father knocked on Emmanuel's door. Emmanuel looked at my parents, holding on to their 2 small daughters, their faces shadowed in despair, and he said, "We will make room for you." I think often of that moment because I wonder if my parents would have survived the war had they not benefited from that act of kindness. For 3 years, my parents were refugees. And they owed a lot, not only to Emmanuel, but also to many humanitarian workers, those women and men magnificent in their bravery and their vulnerability and their commitment. But my parents were not just refugees. Nobody is ever just a refugee. Nobody is ever just a single thing. And yet, in the public discourse today, we often speak of people as single things. Refugee, immigrant. We dehumanize people when we reduce them to a single thing. And this dehumanization is insidious and unconscious. It happened to me some years ago. I was visiting Mexico from the US, and at the time, just as it is now, the political climate in the US was tense, and there were debates going on about immigration. And immigration was often synonymous with Mexicans. And Mexicans were all portrayed through a singular lens of negativity. There were stories about Mexicans being arrested at the border, stealing, fleecing the healthcare system, bringing disease. I remember walking around on my first day in Guadalajara, a beautiful city, watching people who were going to work and school, people who were laughing, people who were buying and selling in the market. At first, I felt surprised. And then I was overwhelmed with shame. I realized that I had been so immersed in the American media's narrow coverage of Mexicans that I had forgotten their humanity. And I could not have been more ashamed of myself. In my language, Igbo, the word for love in Igbo, the word for love is ifunanya, and its literal translation is to see. So I would like to suggest today that this is a time for a new narrative, a narrative in which we truly see those about whom we speak. Let us tell a different story. Let us tell the story differently. Let us remember that the movement of human beings on earth is not new. Human history is a story of movement and mingling. Let us remember that we are not just bones and flesh, we are emotional beings. We all share a desire to be valued, a desire to matter. Let us remember that dignity is as important as food.
Oh, you can hear me again. You can hear me? Yes?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, thanks. I think I really love this piece by her. I love all of her pieces, but I think this one is really amazing because not only does she say, you know, she kind of says, I had this, you know, stereotype, and she admits sort of feeling this shame, but she makes this plea for us to see, you know, see people in all sorts of ways. I think it's very understandable for anyone. So I think one of the, I'm going to wrap up just with this, the kind of causes of migration, both forced and not, that we can go back to that tie into what we teach in all sorts of different ways and we can think about are both the rise of nationalisms and nation states, the creation of settler colonial states, natural disasters, famines, environmental crises, and these are what the people, scholars and practitioners in the refugee and displaced communities think about in as coming ones for many more complicated reasons than just the obvious one. Also, as we're seeing today in so many parts of the world, invasions, wars, revolutions, state violence. We also see migration, forced migration due to economic impoverishment, due to all sorts of reasons. And then we also see more migration as part of economic opportunities. And then why do people flee their homes? I mean, we know this for all these reasons. And then finally, I want to close with thinking about a poem by a Somali British poet named Warsan Shire. And there's a good unit down there in the link to teaching this, although it's a challenging poem to teach, I think maybe only at the higher levels. But she says, no one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only run for the border when you see the whole city running as well. Your neighbors running faster than you, breath bloody in their throats. The boy you went to school with who kissed you dizzy behind the old tin factory is holding a gun bigger than his body. You only leave home when home won't let you stay. And I think she really kind of helps us think about some of those larger questions that come out of when home won't let you stay, what do you end up doing? And so I always ask my students these kind of questions. We live in this international political system that's based on a country and a citizen model. So how do refugees fit into that? Or stateless people who don't have access to citizenship fit into that model? How do migrants fit into a model where they pay taxes and access services, but they may not be citizens or may not even ever be able to access citizenship? They may even be deemed illegal by the state. And then how do we deal with children in this model? And then I oftentimes address, when do refugees or migrants become a crisis, and who gets to define them as a crisis? And who are they a crisis? You know, they are already experiencing a crisis, but they don't become a crisis for Europe or America or somewhere else until they reach our borders. And so how can we kind of rethink a world in which we think about humans more generally and not as pegging them as sort of a crisis? I will end there, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. That was really powerful and a good way to end. We'd like to take questions for just about 5 minutes because I would like to share some classroom strategies for the two books. I will say again that the materials are in the resource folder. I will provide that link one more time in the chat. It's a quite rich resource folder. It has all 3 PowerPoints now in it. And we will then let people do 5 questions. Helen, would you like to conduct that for a few minutes? Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat. I don't see any yet, or if you'd like to raise your hand to speak out, we'd love to entertain a question or two. I have one, but I want to leave the floor to our audience. Are there any questions? I'll start just briefly with one. Thank you, Rochelle, for that. I thought you did a wonderful job in bringing in Omar's perspective on his writings, as well as Brian's, as well as your own. So thank you very much for that. In our current climate, with critical race theory being supposed and thrust upon use in the K through 12, which we know it's not taught there, but it has implications. Again, someone had said previously in the chat that a lot of these books have a lot of trauma, and perhaps it's too much trauma for K through 12. Rather than thinking about the events that bring about the need for the book is very traumatic, people are living them. So what's your advice for teachers using these books and these ideas in an age-appropriate way?
I'm not going to be able to answer that because I teach college students and I don't have kids, so I'm like doubly disadvantaged to answering that question. But I talk to my students about how they make me feel. I always bring in a box of Kleenex, and I have tears in my eyes now. I wept when I read this book. Sorry. See. I wept. I mean, this book is so beautiful. And I think you just have to address them like, so stupid. Susan knows me, I cry all the time. But I think it's really important just to say, you've got to develop these skills in your life. Your grandparents are going to die. People are going to die in your life. How can we as a community support each other? Somebody cries, you give everybody a group hug. I know that's harder in COVID times, but there's ways to your jobs are so hard to educate kids to become adults. And then you've got this stupid stuff about you can't talk about these things and you have to be careful. And I totally understand the sensitivities about age appropriateness. So I'm not trying to go past that. But somehow we have to bring our children into the world with us and not keep them in a box as if they're going to break. And because they have to have the skills to encounter the things that are going to make them human and make them part of us. And you guys have the hardest job ever, but I think these are such beautiful things to teach with. And both these books really talk about how we are human and how, they're both really beautiful because they are about how we support each other. I love the Omar Muhammad book because it's about kids, right? And there are kids being mean to each other, and there's kids loving each other, and there's kids supporting each other. And his relationship with his brother Hassan is just phenomenal. He's my brother, and I got to take him with me. And I think that there are real lessons in there that a teacher can focus on that doesn't focus on the trauma, but instead focuses on beyond the trauma, what you do after it's happened, what you do to hold together, what you do to bring hope. He talked about sort of hope. I'm so sorry, I cried.
Well, one interesting thing is that on the same time they're talking about not disturbing people with this supposed critical race theory, they're also pushing that teachers should incorporate social emotional learning. Well, what do you want us to do exactly? But I would go for the fact that obviously one is cultivating empathy. And without empathy, who are we? Without compassion, who are we? Without, we also say we teach the social studies and the humanities in order to empower people to change, to think, to understand, to see. I love that word in that she mentioned in the speech. The word for love means to see. So we have to show people these things and show how to see them. We have to see and not put our head in, under the couch or to be desensitized by the news reporting that comes around these things. These bring out that social emotional learning, and it is positive, even while it hurts.
Rochelle, thank you. And thank you, Susan, for that. I might pose a question if there are no questions in the chat. Is anyone in the audience would like to raise their hand? We do have a question. Wonderful. Ashley Miranda Wilkinson. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd actually posted this in a chat, but it was during the presentation, so it might have been missed. Just kind of broadening the scope a little bit. I know we're talking about these two particular books, but are there any specific pedagogical practices that you might suggest might best serve to positively impact immigrants, refugees, defectors, those coming into our education system, to help them kind of connect greater to the new environment and the new settings that they're now thrust in?
Ashley, I saw your question in the chat, and thanks for asking it again. And when I was preparing for this, I went to this website that I just posted in the chat called Reimagining Migration.org, and they have a work, I think that's the right one. You can, I would try looking there. They have a whole system of kind of how do you think about, I thought it was a really interesting website. Again, I'm not a teacher, so I don't know how to actually, I'm not a teacher of K through 12, so I don't know how to actually bring it into a classroom, but I thought that would be really useful. And then I think Karen, yeah, Karen Brown also asked about sort of early childhood education, and that website may have stuff for early childhood education in there. Yeah, so those, I think there are community organizations too, depending on where you are, Ashley, that also help bring that in. I know there are, in the US immigration system, there are 8 different, I think there are 8 immigration organizations that we can work with, that work with resettling refugees and displaced persons. And so depending on where you are, so one of them, for example, is the Lutheran World Services. There's the Ethiopian ECDC, Ethiopian, I can never remember what it stands for. There's HIAS, the Hebrew something, Immigrant Aid Society. But depending on your community, that they may be able to also suggest resources or bring in speakers or be a sort of an outlet for those kinds of things. And they, because they are designed to do refugee resettlement and work with them to access the system, they know both adults and children, and so they might be good people to kind of speak to some of the challenges, etc. I can give you my email, and I can look that stuff up for you if you want, and if you tell me where you are. I'm putting my email in the chat. I'm happy to try and help anyone. Rabia has a comment in the chat as well.
Okay. Oh, yes. Giving students an opportunity to contribute to making situations better can help a lot. Drawing cards, donating clothes. Wonderful comment. Thank you, Rabia, for sharing that with us.
Yeah, I like that as a way, Rabia, of part of teaching students empathy by doing, right? We need to be thinking about others, and how do we do that? So yeah, that's a lovely suggestion, even if it's just, drawing cards.
Right. Rabia was also involved at the Berry School in a program with students having conversations with refugees to help with their English, something that Omar also referenced in his talk, that support and help. And this is at the K-12 level. I remember she actually gave a presentation at Georgetown about that. Her students were brought in who did that. So she knows where else she speaks.
Okay, any other comments? We have couple of minutes. Anyone would like to raise her hand or put it in the chat? If not, I'm going to hand it back to Susan for any. Oh, we do have a wonderful question. Wonderful. Marion Berry from Howard University.
Hello, it's just a comment because my major is special education, so I'm working right now internship with students with special needs, and throughout the whole presentation, I've been thinking about explicit instruction. You don't know what you don't know until you know it. And that made me also think about how the classroom is a microcosm of society. And that statement is, I think I heard from like John Dewey, and it's very important. And even working at Howard, because I'm also an administrator, and I feel like my brain is so expanded because I've lived in Saudi Arabia, I'm from West Africa, and I have instant connections with students no matter where they're from. I don't know if it's because of, the fact that I've been in different places. And I think what will help also, what I would say is to encourage people to travel, because they'll tell me, oh, you live in Saudi Arabia? Well, yeah, how was it? I'm not telling you, you go find out, because you can't rely on what I say, you have to see for yourself. And so also as an international student, because that's how I came in, I like a little bit of hand holding. And I remember when Omar Mohamed was also talking, somebody asked a question about the vetting process. And then just yesterday, one of my colleagues at Howard was saying that, well, they were helping a student get admitted into university. They made him take the TOEFL, but he's from a country that speaks, that English is the official language. So you make that person go through that additional step. For me, I speak French. Like, I can understand why somebody would ask me to take the TOEFL, but there's so many layers that I think if people just stop and try to pretend you don't know this person and assume that they come with a baggage, then that will help a lot in interacting with people. And my son, he's 8 years old. We were watching TV. I watch Al Jazeera a lot. I watch different news because I don't want to rely on just one source. And this image was Israel bombing like one of the building, I think the Reuters, the API, I can't remember which journalist building. And he just started crying. I didn't know what was going on. And I'm thinking about the age and how appropriate these books are. But I had to stop and explain to him that, yeah, war is not good. Again, back to explicit instruction. So I think when I was hearing the questions about what's the appropriate age to introduce these books, I think it's at the discretion of the parent, and maybe, you know, running through the parent first and then, you know, going back to the teacher. But I think the earlier the better. And based on what Ms. Davis, Dr. Davis, I'm not sure, I can't remember your title. I agree, because I think we should just let them know on the front end rather than try to put them in a box, because it's the world that we live in and it's the reality. Sorry for taking too much time. I just wanted to say that.
Okay, before we leave, it's 4 o'clock now, but I really need maybe just 1 or 2 minutes of your time for a very essential task. I would like to share my screen if I may, and just share with you the document that I put together on strategies around the 2 books that we had presented. And these are ideas really to get the students inside the books, to get them to put themselves in the picture, to use the visual aspects of both of these books to really expand their view of things. There's a framing activity here in the second one. We don't have time for me to go through them, but these are all in the resource folder, which I will once again put into the chat. So it's right there. There's a folder that has extensive resources for you there. And not the last of which is to look into the George Butler's career as an illustrator, reportage illustrator, and suggesting that students keep a sketchbook where they are able to capture what is around them. So I'm going to stop sharing there. And what I really want to emphasize, though, for everyone who's here, we still have 51. We've lost a couple of people. There's a forum which I have placed the link for in the chat for everyone. It's the evaluation and book mailing confirmation form. In that form, you will register your attendance, the fact that you were present here, and you will also register your choice of the 2 books. And we will also give you the opportunity then to provide an evaluation of how well this workshop met your expectations and how useful you find this in your work. So with that, I'm just going to put the link to the resource folder one more time to make sure that you have it. And that is here. And I also want to thank our speakers once again and all the attendees, because this, I think, has been a remarkable workshop, remarkable experience for everyone. And it's really, oh, that didn't take the link. Okay, sorry. I will get that link right now. And here it is for the resource folder. And again, that document is there. There are a number of other books, strategies for the classroom that are attuned to the 2 books, specific to the 2 books, including a guide from the publisher, Penguin Random House, and then the classroom strategies for these 2 books. So you have a real wide range of things, as well as other books and resources that we always feature in this, our 7th joint Howard University, Georgetown University Children and Youth Literature. I would call it an extravaganza at this point. So thank you so much. And to anybody who is here, who is experiencing the first day of Ramadan, Ramadan Kareem, Ramadan Mubarak. And with that, I will close, and please do go immediately to that form and fill it out before you forget, because it is the difference between getting a book and not getting a book. And again, those books are also provided by the grants from Title VI, U.S. Department of Education, National Resource Grants, Title VI.
So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your weekend. And thank you to my colleagues at Howard for another wonderful experience.
Susan, somebody's asking in the chat if those links will be provided via email as well.
Not necessarily, because we had several hundred people, almost 150 people registered, and you are the elites who were here. We will eventually make the video available, the recording that we're doing today, and along with that will come the resource link as well. So, is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, it's being recorded.
And of course, then we will also share the resource link with everybody who registered. But the privilege of receiving the books is yours and yours alone, who came and actually attended.
I'd also like to say thank you to Dr. Althea Caldera from the CNI department attended today. And thank you to all my students who attended and asked very good questions. So thank you. And Miss Miriam Berry as another student as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. And I wish you a great rest of the day and weekend. And again, Ramadan Kareem to all of those who are practicing the fast.
Thank you. Another colleague on board I see is Teresa McDowell, a reading teacher from Mansfield, Ohio. A shout out. Have a great day. Thanks for attending, Teresa.
And thank you, Patricia Kuntz. And thank you, Leanne Rosenberg. I see your names. And Karen Brown. You always show up, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you all. I think we're all having trouble hanging up.
Built such a great community in these 3 hours.
Yeah.
It was just a fantastic.
Exactly.